So, let's kick off this explainer by asking ourselves a genuinely terrifying question. What actually happens when the monsters from our campfire stories step out of the shadows and, well, into reality? You know, we all know the classic tropes, right? The haunted house on the hill, the strange figure lurking in the forest, the boogeyman that hunts at night. We tell these stories to scare each other, totally confident that they're just figments of our collective imagination. But what if they aren't?
Today, we're exploring that fascinating, kind of unsettling space where terrifying urban legends meet strange, real-world events. We're going to peel back the layers of some of the world's most infamous myths and compare the wild folklore with the documented facts. And what we'll find is that the truth is often much stranger and honestly, sometimes significantly more tragic than the legends themselves. All right, let's get into Act 1, Accidental Hauntings and Hallucinations.
We're going to start by looking at how innocent environmental factors can spawn the absolute most chilling ghost stories. Our first case takes us down to Australia, proving that sometimes a haunting isn't the work of the supernatural, but of simple biology. So, in West Hobart, Tasmania, a house became totally infamous in the 80s and 90s for allegedly driving a family out of their minds with supernatural activity. Tourists and locals alike whispered about this incredibly creepy old town home. The rumors created this massive buzz, and people avoided the property at all costs, totally convinced that demonic forces were slowly stripping the residents of their sanity. And the truly scary part? The residents actually were losing their minds, sinking further and further into delirium.
But when authorities finally investigated the place, they discovered the culprit wasn't a ghost. It was a highly toxic plant known as TRUEE, or the devil's trumpet. This is a species in the nightshade family known for its incredibly powerful hallucinogenic properties. Historically, it was used in some pretty hardcore spiritual rituals because even in low to medium doses, TRUEE causes highly distressing, delirious experiences.
Now, what's really fascinating here is just how methodically the poisoning happened. Completely by accident, causing a family to slowly lose their sanity through their own drinking water. A datura vine had simply grown through the trees directly above the home. Its toxic leaves were falling right into the family's rainwater tank. So every single time they took a drink, they were inadvertently consuming microdoses of this powerful hallucinogen, day after day. There were no ghosts, just a tragic, accidental chemical poisoning. Crazy, right?
Moving right along to Act 2, Phantoms of the Forest. From chemical delusions, we move to real people who isolated themselves until they became literal folklore. Up in Maine, the North Pond Hermit became a local boogeyman. He disappeared into the freezing woods at age 20 and evaded capture for nearly 3 decades without saying a word to almost anyone. For years, cabins in the Kennebec Valley were mysteriously broken into, over 1,000 times in total. The locals whispered about a ghost or a monster, but it was just a guy named Christopher Thomas Knight. He walked into the woods around the time of the Chernobyl disaster in 1986 and wasn't caught until 2013. For nearly 30 years, he never lit a fire, moved only at night, and spoke only one word to another human being. He just said hi to a passing hiker.
The truly unbelievable point here is that his legendary status was fueled by over 1,000 desperate break-ins for completely mundane items. Yet he survived 20 below winters with almost nothing of his own. Literally everything he needed to survive the brutal winters in a nylon tent. His food, his books, right down to his jackets and underwear was stolen from nearby cabins. The only thing he actually owned to his name? His 1984 high school glasses. He was a phantom to the locals, sure, but in reality, he was just a deeply isolated man trying to survive.
Meanwhile, over in Switzerland, an urban legend known as Liloyan absolutely terrified hikers with sightings of a silent, gas mask-wearing humanoid wandering the woods. Since the early 2000s, people in the Fribourg forest reported seeing this 6-foot-tall figure in a vintage gas mask and a boiler suit. Naturally, local legends spun wildly out of control. Some claimed it was the ghost of a mentally unstable soldier, while others swore it was an alien. Parents called the police, and Liloyan became known as the Hermit of Malise.
But the reality of this one is deeply heartbreaking. After a viral photograph exposed the figure, clothes and a suicide note were found in 2013, revealing the monster was just a harmless, reclusive person whose happiness therapy walks were ruined by public attention. The intense media scrutiny actually drove this reclusive individual to abandon their walks, leaving behind their outfit and a note blaming the media for turning them into a circus freak. The monster wasn't a monster at all, just a vulnerable human seeking peace.
All right, on to Act 3, the bizarre case of Aree. Transitioning to the northwest of England, we find a highly specific and deeply bizarre harassment case. Back in the late 1980s and 90s, teenagers spread wild rumors of a giant called Purple Aree. He was an urban legend who would supposedly hunt down muscular young men for terrifying reasons. The legend was utterly ridiculous, tales of a massive boogeyman wandering Liverpool who would literally swallow you whole if you let him near you. It sounded exactly like the kind of tall-tale bored teenagers invent to scare each other on the playground, right?
Well, the reality was a real man, Akinwale Aree, whose incredibly strange modus operandi involved traveling by train to stalk and measure the muscles of teenage boys. He would actually track down young men, particularly rugby players, and ask for permission to squeeze their muscles. If they complied, he would hold on for far too long, demand they perform squats so he can inspect their quads, and offer unsolicited fitness advice. So no, he wasn't a supernatural giant, but his relentless, deeply uncomfortable harassment was very, very real.
The bizarre nature of this case took a super dark and tragic turn when Aree chased a 16-year-old onto train tracks, leading to the teen's accidental electrocution. Yet Aree's manslaughter conviction was overturned on appeal, resulting in a massive compensation payout. In 1986, a young boy named Gary Keller fled from Aree at a train station, jumped onto the tracks, and was tragically electrocuted. Aree was initially convicted of manslaughter, but a judge later ruled there just wasn't enough evidence to prove he directly caused the death. So he was freed and awarded £35,000 in compensation. He spent the next several decades going in and out of prison for similar harassment offenses. It really proves that truth is often way more frustrating and bizarre than fiction.
And finally, Act 4. True Monsters of the Woods.
We're going to close this explainer with the darkest themes, where campfire stories stemmed from entirely real, violent predators. These are the legends that serve as stark warnings, masking real-world horrors in the guise of ghost stories. In Staten Island, the legendary hook-handed Cropsey was actually a smokescreen for the grim reality of Andre Rand. The myth was your standard slasher movie fare, a facially scarred, hook-handed maniac dragging children into the woods to avenge his dead son. Parents used it to keep kids from wandering off. But in the early 1970s, children actually started disappearing in Staten Island, and the lines between the Cropsey legend and reality horrifyingly blurred.
The real Cropsey was a man named Andre Rand. Rand worked at the notoriously brutal Willowbrook State School and spent the 70s and 80s tied to the tragic disappearances of multiple young girls before finally being put behind bars. Looking at his history, Rand was a known predator. He was frequently seen walking with young children or buying them meals. It wasn't until 1987 that undeniable evidence linked him to the murder of a 12-year-old girl, and it took until 2004 for him to be charged with another kidnapping from decades earlier. The boogeyman was real, and he walked among the community in plain sight.
Similarly, the DMV area was terrorized by the legend of the Bunny Man, an axe-wielding rabbit man supposedly tied to a 1904 asylum bus crash and an escaped patient named Douglas Griffin. According to the standardized myth, this escaped patient survived on raw rabbits and would string his victims up by their necks under Colchester Overpass, which is now known as Bunny Man Bridge, every Halloween at midnight. It's an incredibly elaborate Hollywood-level story that has spawned t-shirts, beer, and even horror movies.
But when we peel back the myth of blue orbs and hanging bodies, the reality was simply a terrifying, unexplained 1970 incident where a man threw a hatchet at a parked car. A young couple was parked near the bridge when a man, angry that they were trespassing, threw a hatchet at their window. In the initial police report, the victims simply described him as wearing light-colored clothing. But as the story hit the news, rumors spiraled that he was wearing a bunny suit. Decades of a whispering campaign morphed a random, aggressive encounter into a sprawling, supernatural serial killer myth.
It's just human nature to dress up our fears in fantastical stories, isn't it? We create monsters because they're somehow easier to understand than the random chaos of a tragic accident, the deep sadness of human isolation, or the all-too-real predators that exist in our society. But comparing these wild myths to their documented realities leaves us with this pretty provocative thought. What grim reality is lurking behind the ghost stories in your own hometown?